Frosthaven, the highly acclaimed big box campaign board game sequel to Gloomhaven, is getting a digital version on Steam. For some of you, that premise alone is grounds to immediately buy this game because I've read so many comments online to the effect of, I'd be playing so much more Frosthaven if there weren't so many rules to manage. Well, there you go. Frosthaven is a video game now. All the upkeep, crazy special scenario rules, and complicated class mechanics will be automated. No more stray interactions you forget to manually do yourself on an IRL table. Go check out its early access with this Steam link in the description. You're gonna love it. Shout out to Art Games, the publisher, for the link and sponsorship. As always, if that makes this video as yapping come off as capping, totally valid, and I encourage you to seek out additional coverage as well. Anyways, what about the rest of you who aren't immediately picking this up? Those with more concerns about how well the experience translates over to a video game. What about you guys who aren't board gamers and have never heard of Frosthaven, so these goofy little board game hiccups are meaningless? Okay. It's time to talk about the dang video game already. Frosthaven is a card-based dungeon crawler for 1 to 4 players where you pick a character and do missions, unlocking more missions and stuff to customize your character's build between missions. Also, you're managing the town of Frosthaven itself, because doing missions gets you resources that you can use to craft not just gear, but also town building so that it can produce more stuff so that you can make better gear. For the actual combat, gameplay is every round you pick 2 cards from your hand, all the enemies draw 1 of their own, and then you play out the round. Rinse and repeat until you win the mission or lose because you died by running out of cards. If you like card-based strategy games and you like dungeon crawlers, this is a unique mix with a very compelling gameplay loop since you're managing card economy on top of hex-based dungeon crawling positioning. Not gonna get too much into the weeds because I've already made a 2-hour-long review that does that, and this is a faithful digital adaptation, not a complete remake, meaning like 99% of the mechanics are identical. So this is still peak gameplay. Spoiler alert, I absolutely love this game and have so much fun with it no matter the version. Anyways, the actual in-depth gameplay systems are far more complicated than the oversimplification I just gave, because this is one of those games where the foundation is actually pretty simple, but then there's so many extra unique mechanics on top that alter the rules, which then makes it way more difficult to account for everything because they're essentially creating localized mini-games within the game, which is a more common thing that occurs with sequels or live service games that steadily feature creep when needing to expand upon their game's mechanics to keep it interesting. It's honestly fascinating to see how a game can play completely different in a later version compared to its initial launch despite having the same foundation just because of so much extra content being thrown into its sandbox. Examples of what I'm talking about would be any long-lasting game that got regular updates, so think TCGs like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic, or live service games such as Dead by Daylight, Fortnite, Destiny 2, right? These are all games where the current version plays like a completely different game despite having the same foundational rules as when they came out. The original Gloomhaven had way more generic classes and enemies, resulting in, when compared to today, more straightforward gameplay loops that usually boiled down to do a simple move and attack every turn. Where the interesting foundational hook came from was the card play management and turn order manipulation, since cards have different initiative speeds, so you're always trying to ration your hand to be able to take your turns and specific actions at the most opportune moments. Like most commonly, if spice was added to the gameplay recipe, an attack would occasionally be modified with a status effect. Plus, mission objectives were frequently some flavor of kill everything in the dungeon. That lends itself well to being a board game that's much more accessible to a wider audience because there's less rules that need to be managed, leading to an experience that's easy to learn while still having so much depth to master thanks to the card play and build variety. But with Frosthaven, there's way more feature creep wacky shenanigans. Like there's a class that can switch between 2 forms, each with their own hand of cards, and another one where their cards essentially have 4 different options instead of the regular 2. On top of that, missions are almost always going to have unique and varied objectives that can end up demanding a different axes of problem solving by introducing a bunch of special rules. So you might find yourself having to escort something, or defend something, or repair something. Sure, that's run-of-the-mill encounter design when it comes to gameplay in a video game, but anytime you push boundaries in a board game, it slows down the experience tremendously, since players have to fiddle with all the pieces and edge case rules themselves instead of having a computer do it for them. Like, even if they don't fully comprehend what's going on, if the action is automated, they can shrug and go, I guess that's how that interaction works. The limitation of physically managing rules and pieces in real life might also make you play worse if you're having to dedicate brain bandwidth and making sure everything's functioning properly as per the rulebook that's most of the way there to 100 pages. However, that's more when overcoming the initial dozen of hours learning hurdle, because if you can make the rules deeply internalized and second nature so you can focus purely on the gameplay, the analog restriction will give you the deepest understanding of how the game works because of how you have to manage everything yourself. In fact, I bet you it's totally a regular thing for a newcomer to the digital version to get by playing the game just fine despite not fully grasping how the enemy AI works because it's all automated. And for that to be a legitimate learning block, keeping them from consistently winning harder situations and difficulties. This is an important reality to not overlook when it comes to big epic board games and the capability for people to play them. Because if you don't got free time, you obviously can't dedicate a whole day to learning and setting Frosthaven up. And that's not even mentioning if it fits onto your table. And that's also not even mentioning that the process of rules internalizing isn't just the initial learning process, because you gotta keep learning more and more as you regularly unlock things and do new missions with their unique rules. In a video game, that's just keeping things fresh and is the expected progression of a game, because otherwise players get bored really quickly, since video games as a genre are a rich environment of constant novelty, with lower barriers to entry thanks to how developers tend to have to stop and consider every exact angle of how players interact with their game and how to get them to intuitively pick up on what's going on via vibing it out. Meanwhile, in a board game, more and more mechanics means more and more rules means forcing you to have to stop the game and learn before continuing, which can get exhausting pretty quickly. It's essentially offloading onto the players what would have otherwise been developer work coding the game's logic, and I'm sure most of you would rather be playing a game rather than making sure it works properly. Thus, Frosthaven Digital does not run into the dual terror of mental load and pacing issues that the physical version has. If a cool thing is going on in a scenario, it just happens, and no need to stop, set up, learn, then manage the cool moment yourself. That's what I would fundamentally say is the board game's biggest issue that can't really be solved as a board game. It's just the reality of what needs to be done in order to play a board game of that scale. It can be designed around with alleviation by not neglecting things like well-written, unambiguous rulebooks with clear and pretty visuals. In IMO, that side of board games should always be given just as, if not more attention than the gameplay itself if you're going big with audience reach and game size. But fundamentally, there's no automatic rulings fix that can be designed within analog limitations. The TLDR of all that is that every single commenter who says board game too big should have been a video game was actually spitting facts without the printer. This is not a hot take, it is ice cold. Like most people I know think any board game bigger than the standard size, basically an 11-inch square box that's like 2 inches tall, is crazy work. The only time I think people in the broader sphere of gaming, aka just people in general, because everyone's a gamer nowadays, are okay with massive rulebooks would be in the context of TTRPGs, which also don't even have to be completely read thoroughly, and the rules are just suggestions anyways. With all that framework finally established, let's finally talk about how well Frosthaven works as a video game. First up, price. No, not Price Johnson of Cephalofair Games, the makers of Frosthaven. The digital version will be $40, a fraction of the $250 MSRP of the physical. Of course, if you want to play 4-player, that's 4 copies and 160 total. But that's still significantly cheaper. Not to mention Steam game means eventually Steam sales that will probably come even after only waiting a few months. And if we're being real here, for a lot of you, it's going to be more common to be a group playing at 2 or 3 players versus 4, or you're a solo gamer. Point is, it's significantly cheaper, especially because we didn't even factor in shipping and taxes with physical, and no, I don't believe you if you say you play games yet don't have a PC or Steam Deck in this day and age. While this ain't on consoles, I'd be very surprised if it doesn't come eventually, like a handful of years down the line, just like Gloomhaven Digital. But also, I feel like consoles besides Switches are kind of petering out, because somehow I've met way more people that have a Steam Deck and no current gen consoles, and their Steam Deck is exclusively a Balatro and Slate Aspire machine to squeeze in games in short intervals throughout their busy day. Might as well add Frosthaven into that routine, because scenarios you can easily finish in like 30 to 40 minutes when soloing. Yup, the digital version plays more than twice as fast as physical. A huge part of that is completely ignoring physical setup, cleanup, and moving the pieces around yourself during gameplay.
There is no major setup needed.
Which is something that people online never seem to factor into playtime length, and at this point my besties just say add an extra hour to assumed game length for their scheduling sake, and a more practical metric for how long a board game actually takes. Not to mention another for teaching. What's crazy is that you can play even faster because you can also toggle animation speed up to 5 times faster. Like seriously, if you're playing lower complexity classes and just full sending it at lower player counts, with that animation speed, you're probably clearing scenarios in like 20 something minutes. One of the biggest time wasters that's solved in digital are the scenarios that flood the board with enemies. Normally you'd be manually moving around every single idiot here yourself, but if there's like a dozen dudes on screen digitally, they all just move on their own. Like something I've always wondered was if people online, when criticizing this aspect, actually hate these scenarios from a gameplay standpoint, or if having to manage all these enemies physically was getting in the way of having fun. Because I've always enjoyed their spectacle and different strategy approaches, but also think it's valid to be annoyed by all the upkeep. Being able to fast forward like 10 enemies all doing the same thing completely stops the mental overload. Of course, speeding up animations means not getting to appreciate as much all the character models and their movements, because it's so cool to see the board game come to life here. Though admittedly, you'll probably care less when seeing the same animations multiple times once you're familiar with them. Me personally, it's a dream come true getting to see the craft crab lads skittering around on my screen because giant colorful crabs kills me with whimsy. I will never get tired of seeing the crabs be crabs. But the even cooler part is how digital breathes life into the aspects of physical that don't have visuals attached to them. Because now every story blurb and ability card has art on them. It's so cool seeing the story and events come to life with illustrations and voiceovers from Foreteller, an app that provides it for board games. And in terms of performance, my PC has a 4080 Super, Ryzen 7 5800X, and 16 gigs of RAM. I'm also still playing on a 1080p 240Hz monitor because I'm a resolution caveman, and Frosthaven is pretty much always in the hundreds of frames on max settings, unless I'm speeding the animations up and or there's a million guys on screen. Not a very demanding game, wouldn't be surprised if somewhere, somehow, some smarty farty is playing it on their smart fridge while they cooking. If you're someone who games on a fridge, tell us how that goes in the comments. In fact, use that smart fridge to support us on Patreon and Coffee, like all these wonderful people here. Okay, enough talking about visuals, I want to talk features, like the constant autosaving, which is a godsend if you ever mess up and need to undo. This is a very nice feature if you realize that you've forgotten about something like an objective or battle goal 3 entire rounds ago and need to rewind to get back on track. Hilarious that save scumming exists and is another advantage over the board game, since ain't no way you're gonna remember the exact game state to reset that far back. Like in the IRL touch grass version, at most you're probably going to just quickly take back a turn or two because you brain farted and forgot that you weren't supposed to move to some specific spot because then something is in range to attack you. In digital, you unfortunately can't undo a movement once it's performed. This game only lets you undo selecting things, but there is a restart round button, which is super convenient. Annoyingly, that means you're gonna have to reselect your cards, which feels like forever in a video game, despite this all overall still being like a million times faster than the board game. But yeah, it would be nice if we could undo the last performed action. Regardless, all this automatic enemy turns and easy access to reloading a save from a different round stuff makes me deadass so much more lazier with keeping track of what all the enemies are going to do, and I honestly love it. Oh, and super useful learning tool, at the end of a scenario, you can also see a bunch of stats for how well you did that scenario, which really gives you a good idea of which classes are doing what roles and exactly how well they're doing them. Also, it's a fun little hero shooter-esque screen that notes a cute little title for the thing you did the most of. Super useful feature if you're kind of confused about what direction you want to take a class, and realize through this that you play it better if you focus on the aspects of it you score the highest on. So that's all the stuff that's just blatant positives if you ask me. But now I want to address the concerns that may or may not even be outright issues, because do keep in mind that this is all muddled anyways, since it's possible that stuff that doesn't work so well is already being addressed internally and just isn't early access ready. Probably the most important thing to talk about is the UI, which retains most of its skeleton from Gloomhaven Digital. Now this is an aspect of these games that I've personally never had any issues with, and given my 50 hours in Gloomhaven Digital, I'm already very used to the Frosthaven interface. However, I have seen quite a number of comments online taking issue with how many clicks it takes to do anything, and how some information should be more easily accessible. Like, I remember complaints that you have to actually hit a button to see enemy stats instead of just hovering over them, which currently does at least show what they do for the turn. That, and also people wanting to be able to see your items via hovering and not clicking. And yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Those are things I'm looking at regularly enough that it probably warrants shaving off some clicks. I think the reason things like that don't bother me as much is because I'm used to playing Master Duel with like a million confirmation prompts on every insane interaction in the circus that is modern day Yu-Gi-Oh!, and I do enjoy getting into the weeds of highly specific gameplay mechanics, which is actually something that's streamlined here for the sake of achieving expediency from less clicks. Because as an example, if we look at Drifter's shielded and retaliate action here, if you perform their top action, the game will automatically perform both abilities. But how the game's supposed to work is that you can choose to do any or both, because each ability is its own thing separated by a line. So you could do only the shield or retaliate instead of both. But obviously that's niche because like 90-something% of the time you're gonna want to do both. As such, I think this is a good thing to sacrifice, because in my experience, most people are not the types to want to or even enjoy hyper-specificity. And while that may slightly annoy me, I can immediately see why people would be very annoyed with adding in extra clicks to confirm yes on both the shield and the retaliate individually. Same thing goes for the enemy AI, because if there's ever a tie for which space they should move to, it's randomly chosen here instead of players picking. And if they were to make it perfectly accurate to physical, they'd have to add more UI elements and coding logic, plus even more confirmation prompts for which space the players want. All of that for a feature that I'd wager most casual enjoyers don't give a second thought to. Would I love for there to be more options to toggle to give me those sweet extra confirmation prompts? Absolutely, but I'm not a game developer. I review board games, where I can easily just change a rule and try it out myself. A change there is essentially just adjusting a sentence on a Word doc. In video game land, where there's bigger teams and budgets and stricter timelines because of all the cash burn, something like that, where you're gonna have to delegate tasks out and time away from actually finishing the game, I'd have to imagine catering to hardcore board gamer wonk with meticulous rulings accuracy is not not at the very top of the list of priorities whiteboard to-do list I'm sure the dev Snapshot Games probably has in their office. Also, by the way, did you know the dev Snapshot Games CEO is the dude who made XCOM? That's crazy. Anyways, yeah, I completely trust these guys to deliver an experience that's gonna get the ball rolling for a way bigger audience than what the board games can hope to capture. It's probably why the default recommended difficulty is actually the board games easy mode, but relabeled as standard here. Because the Haven games are in fact tough, crunchy games, so doing this is a great way to not have people get obliterated in the first scenario and get disheartened. But yeah, in my time playing this press version of Frosthaven, there's already been numerous UI improvements like new tooltips when hovering over buttons, being able to swap which initiative you want from 2 cards selected, adding little explanations to NPC actions so it doesn't need to overload you with special rules info on the right side of the screen, adding class art at the bottom to make it even more obvious whose turn it is. Anyways, enough high confidence and snapshot glazing, back to the land of concerns. I do still worry about complete newcomers to the series, particularly on 2 points: actually understanding how the card management gameplay works and the outpost phase you do in between quests. Reason being is that for the tutorials the game offers, they never actually make you have to use the game's rest mechanics to recover discarded cards. It's just some text box they put up before moving on. This is already an aspect of the Haven games that people struggle to easily grasp even in real life without seeing it in action, which really doesn't help that it's an absolutely vital part of the combat system. I really urge the devs to consider actually making the players perform a rest action and or show some sort of visualization of a hand of cards running out to a discard pile and then getting them back plus losing a card to show the hand shrinking. Maybe even repeatedly speed it up to show the hand eventually running out of cards because they're all lost, since that attrition of steadily losing cards throughout a quest is the primary way you lose in this card-based dungeon crawler. As for the outpost phase, I already know how it all works, so I can intuit everything here. But I didn't see no explanation for everything here or even in the game's codex. Granted, it's not the worst thing ever to just click around on stuff randomly and watch things happen. Like, I'm sure you can figure out how to construct and upgrade buildings by spending resources on them. But I'm pretty sure a newcomer isn't going to know what is going on with the morale, inspiration, and prosperity systems unless it's actually explained to them. Last few things I want to bring up are the expected early access bugs and other hiccups that come with the territory of adapting physical into digital. Because yeah, the reality of early access is that I did encounter a few oddities here and there. Thankfully, nothing was game breaking because the overall experience was still undeniably playable and, more importantly, enjoyable. This is what early access helps greatly with, because by getting more eyes on the game, there will be a lot more bug reports and fixes that can be better directed as a result. Drawback is obviously that the finished game will be less fresh on launch if you've already played a bunch of early access, but hey, that's how the whole thing works. I don't know, kinda less concerned about bugs just cause back in my day when playing Gloomhaven Digital Early Access, it was decently buggy, and I still played quite a bit of it. Meanwhile, Frosthaven is already significantly more smooth. Besides, by the time Gloomhaven Digital came out, it was working just fine, so I'm kinda just like whatever, early access shenanigans. What I'm more personally invested in is how much weird ruling stuff will slip through just by nature of the reality that not everyone who's working on the digital adaptation is gonna have a PhD in Havenometry. Cause I remember there being some jank going on with Gloomhaven Digital and cards that could do out of turn attacks when applying additional effects to them. Like if you gave a temporary stats effect to an out of turn attack, it would go away at the end of the current turn instead of at the end of the target's next turn. Don't really blame those devs, it's a weird interaction because 99% of the time you apply temporary statuses that last till target's next turn, they only last one turn in practice because usually you hit the guy on your turn, then it's their turn, aka their next turn. But in the rare cases you hit them in the middle of their turn with your out of turn attack, that temporary status duration is basically 2 turns because now until next turn means their current turn plus their next. And unfortunately with Frosthaven, I did run into 2 things where I'm not sure if they were bugs or if it's from the devs not having a master's in Haven law. Because this personal quest was only progressing when I used a loot action and not standard looting you do when you end your turn. And I remember in an earlier version, Lurker Claw Crushers have armor breaking attacks that's supposed to punch through your shield with true damage, but for some reason, these were doing damage even if I didn't have any shield. And I think it seemed to be working off the Claw Crusher's shield. But impressively enough, this was fixed in the latest version. However, now there's a funny visual bug, which I'd much rather deal with. Fix one thing and it messes up something else. A classic software shenanigans. But enough weed digging. I said I wouldn't do too much of that here. Most people trying Frosthaven Digital out that haven't already played physical will not care. Hell, even a lot of those who have played may not even dig that deep because I'd bet there's a huge number of people with unfinished Frosthaven campaigns that were started up, only played a handful of times, and then it just kind of petered out from real life constraints. The result of that being a bunch of board game players without a doctorate in Havenology. So with all of that in mind, this gets a very high marks for me. In terms of how well this whole thing is adapting the board game into a video game, it's doing an excellent job. And I absolutely think that streamlining certain confirmation prompts to bring down the amount of clicking is the right call to make. And I am in general wanting this game to be able to have a bigger outreach than the board game because I ultimately want as much people as possible to to be able to get into these games and see how goated they are. Frosthaven Digital is still very one-to-one, and there's so much crunchy decision making and unique gameplay circumstances and even aesthetics to fall in love with here. I'm someone who feels kind of whatever about the usual fantasy elf, dwarf, halfling style lineup, and the Haven games just hit diff with how weird all their playable characters are. Speaking of only my personal enjoyment with these rookie numbers I've spent on digital, I'd say 9 out of 10, because it's just Frosthaven and I already love Frosthaven. For it to go to a 10, all the content needs to be here, all the bugs and early access bumps gotta be smooth, you should be able to short rest without needing to have all characters confirmed or card selection, and I'd really like the ability to create custom levels, maybe even be able to share them so we can keep the Gloomhaven community strong, because it'd be awesome to have a backlog of highly upvoted custom scenarios. I'm also really curious to see how some of the physical unlocks go, like the puzzle book and some of the secret envelopes that ask players to do real life meta things, but I'm assuming those are all going to be heavily reworked or just removed entirely. Either way, very much looking forward to when this game comes out. Hopefully I can rekindle old playthroughs that disbanded or just find easier opportunities to get a new campaign going with friends. Thanks for watching, drop a like, and don't forget to check this game out using our link in the description if you're interested, plus 10% off for the first week of launch. See ya!